Okay, so this one is about something I'm really passionate about, and I think it's one of the most important things we could ever come to understand about nature, and that is grace, the nature of grace. So most of us are familiar with grace, what it means. When we think of something graceful, we think of ballet dancers. I think of Roger Federer, the tennis player, the way that he plays tennis. Or when we enter into legal agreements and contracts, then there's often a grace period. A common clause would be, a grace period of giving 30 days notice. And that 30 days is considered a grace period. And the reason we call it a grace period is because it is devoid of, it removes an abrupt ending. And I would say the opposite of grace is an abrupt ending, or an abrupt beginning. Both are relevant. So, why is grace so important? Well, I'll give you, I'm sure it's obvious to you, but I think a lot of our lives, a huge chunk of our lives is lived devoid of grace. And I think there are many, many aspects of our lives where the missing component that could make it our experience living life so much more profound and enjoyable and fulfilling is grace. And when we talk about an abrupt ending or an abrupt beginning, I would personify that with, I'd use the metaphor of jumping in the pool at the deep end. It's devoid of grace. Now, that doesn't mean it's not effective, but more often than not, there is trauma related to that kind of event. We normally get through it. Let's say you don't know how to swim, you're a child, you're terrified of the water, and you're thrown in at the deep end, and you have no choice but to learn how to swim figure it out, because if you don't, you're going to die. You're probably going to figure out how to swim. Nonetheless, you've probably dissociated from the trauma. And so that'll be something that'll come back to haunt you later in life, because your mind has had to dissociate you from the experience in order to get you through it. So, whether or not you learn how to swim as a result or not, is irrelevant, because there's been a trauma response. And so what's the solution to that trauma that was caused by an abrupt beginning or ending? It's grace. And grace would be to start in the shallow end, take one step, take another step, and just as you're about to lose your footing and it's about to go above your head, you hold onto the handrail, you go another meter, then you stay by the handrail, push yourself out into the middle, tread water for as long as you feel comfortable, and then reach back onto the handrail and keep doing that, inching forward in a state of grace, and there's no trauma involved. Absolutely no trauma involved. It's a total state of grace, and the experience will feel totally fulfilling. It would, for a child that experiences it this way, the experience to them, it will feel like a state of accomplishment, a state of facing a fear and consciously moving towards it, rather than being thrown in at the deep end and the experience being of an experience that they wanted to escape, and in all likelihood were dissociated from in some way. And the purpose of dissociation is to prevent our perspective, is to protect the purity of our innocence. Because if you rob your innocence, then you believe less is possible. And if you believe less is possible, then that impacts your capacity to evolve, expand, and thrive. The less you believe something is possible, the less likely you are to take that first step. And so dissociation prevents you from the reality of the truth of that moment. Trauma is profoundly useful. It enables, especially a child who experiences intense trauma, some form of abuse. Dissociation enables that child to continue evolving and thriving and living their life, because they've dissociated from the reality of the truth. And so they're not completely stuffed up by the event. Whereas if they had to accept the reality of the truth, then they would more than likely believe that nothing is possible, that the environment that they are being raised within it makes it impossible for them to live in any meaningful way. And so the solution is grace. It always is grace. And, another example is, that grace is utilized in therapy. They don't call it grace. They probably don't recognize it as grace, but people who have intense phobias, let's say you have an intense phobia of needles, then you're sitting in the therapist's room and they're outside the door with a needle, and basically they stand there holding the needle, because some people are so terrified of a needle they can't have it anywhere near them. And so the therapist is standing at the door with the needle, holding the needle, you're sitting in the chair, and you invite them to take another step forward, holding the needle. And so when you're ready, you say, I'm ready, and they take a step forward. And then you might hyperventilate, you gauge your reaction, and you say, okay, take another step forward. And they just inch forward, but you're giving the permission, you see. You're giving the therapist permission to take another step forward, and you're willingly confronting a fear. Now, if that therapist, and so what happens basically is you keep giving permission for the therapist to step forward until eventually they can touch your skin with the needle. And it might just be it might be like a sewing needle, and then they rest it on your skin, and then until you can touch that needle, and then the fear has been transcended forevermore. Now, I won't go into the psychology of a fear of needles, but it's underlying a fear of a needle is an intense resistance to being penetrated. And so people who are hugely resistant to needles have huge walls up that are preventing them from receiving. And this is a defense mechanism. It's a coping mechanism because, it's, if you've been abused, then the last thing you want to happen is for your guard, for your wall to be penetrated. You don't want to be invaded. You don't want to be violated. And so any fear that you have of being vulnerable, you're protecting yourself by having a guard up. And so being penetrated is a threat. And for some people, it's so intense that they need to, that they see anything that has the ability to penetrate them. They have an intense fear of it. And obviously this creeps into sexuality as well, but being penetrated by a needle, I think, is the ultimate example. Nonetheless, it's a very, very successful form of therapy, because you've invited it in, you've given your permission. Now, the alternative to that is the therapist is outside with the needle, and they walk up to you without your permission with the needle to put it on your skin. Now, you'll be dissociated from the experience halfway through the event. You'll be in fight, flight, or freeze, probably. What I would call catatonia. When we become catatonic, that's a state of when we are incapable of processing the signals from our environment. It's where they can't come in, they don't come out. We've lost our ability to interpret the signals from our environment. This is what catatonia is. When we perceive our environment to be such a threat that interpreting the signals from that environment are seen as the threat and mitigated through our biology. Isn't that, it's just incredible. So bless anyone that's, that experiences being catatonic. It's a brutal, it's a great coping mechanism, but it means that you perceive your environment to be, really threatening to you. So the solution is grace. It's always grace. And that grace, you want it to be a conscious choice, ideally. So if you look at a government, for example, a classic example of grace in politics is, a government coming out and saying by the year 2038, there'll be no more cars that burn fossil fuels on the roads. And so the grace period is the period between now and then. And I think, we're devoid of a solution currently. Ideally, you want to come out and say that once you know that there is a solution. But nonetheless, it is a form of grace. And I think, governments are doing a great job, I think, of making funding available to innovate in this area. And, having that, knowing that there is an ending, we can begin the process of grace, of creating the ending of fossil fuels, in order to usher in the, exciting new beginning with something else. Mourning for the loss, because I'm one person who's going to dearly miss, especially I've got an intense obsession with the Aston Martin DB9 2015 model in particular. And it's a naturally aspirated V12 engine. Sounds like, I would say it sounds like heaven. And I will, not in any serious way, but I'll mourn the loss of that engine and the ability to have that experience again. So it gives us time to mourn the loss. It gives us time to mourn the loss and to be prepared for that loss. Now, I know that sounds silly, but lots and lots of people will mourn the loss of cars that have engines that burn fossil fuels. But for me personally, and a project I'm obsessed with is turning an Aston Martin DB9, converting it into an electric vehicle, or potentially even hydrogen. But New Zealand isn't equipped for hydrogen yet, and obviously hydrogen can't be produced without burning fossil fuels at the moment, but there is technology on the way that will enable us to actually produce hydrogen rather than have to create solutions that attack molecules that hydrogen's bonded to, which requires burning fossil fuels. Anyway, I digress, but nonetheless, grace enables us to mourn the loss of that. We in the beginning, we were angry, we reject it. No, I don't want to lose this engine. It's a classic and da-da-da-da. But eventually, because it's a grace period, as time goes on, it becomes easier. And then another month goes by, and then a year. And then we progress with the technology. And I'm at the point now where, I was gutted that we'd be losing that engine, but I'm now extremely excited and almost obsessed with a project to convert an Aston Martin DB9 into an electric vehicle, because what that enables me to do is to, and I think this is the classic scenario with wealth generation and people that have created generational wealth. They inevitably want to, at some point, once they've protected themselves, taken care of their family and the legacy of their creations and their assets, and then they want to, they generally want to help their community. And then once they're adequately, helping their community in some way that they're passionate about, they often want to invest in preservation. And this is where you see, some people donate land that's got a farm on it, or some people donate antiquities to museums, or, industries that have become obsolete because they're no longer viable. But there'll be foundations that keep them going for nostalgic purposes, or turn them into, museums, things like that. And I think this is a classic scenario, is how can we preserve the Aston Martin DB9 when the engine is really what makes it such a sublime creation? Well, this is how we can preserve it. This is how we can preserve its legacy, is to reconstitute it into something that takes what is still relevant, to take what is still appropriate, I suppose, meaning ditch the engine and reconstitute it into something that is relevant for now, for the here and now. And when you look at how fast a Tesla is with their electric engines, and if you look at all of the competitors that are coming through right now, and all of the major manufacturers have all got electric cars now, and there's a lot of competition in that space now. The technology is getting better and better. We've got another problem to solve of how to deal with the refuse that's caused with the batteries, but everything's a bridge to something else. Same with hydrogen. Everyone's talking about, you have to burn fossil fuels in order to produce hydrogen. Well, it's a stepping stone. It's a bridge towards something else. And as long as we have that period of grace to adapt, to give ourselves space to let go of what we hold dear, in order to make way for something new, then, as long as we have that, then everything's possible. And so I'm now really excited about being able to be involved in a project like that. And once I've completed that project for myself, and I've got an Aston Martin DB9 with an electric engine, I can share that experience with others, potentially turn it into a business that helps other people to, continue appreciating timeless vehicles. because my ability to appreciate that vehicle is unending. There's just something about that car I feel I'm just so passionate about it. When I look at it, there's just something about its form. It's so timeless, and I want to protect it. I want to preserve it. And there'll be many, many people that want to preserve their timeless vehicles, but they need to understand that mourning the loss of the engine is part of the process. And many people haven't let go yet. They're not even really considering it yet. And there's still a lot of time that people have with these engines. But this is the beauty of grace, and this is why it's so hard. And so this is where I want to segue into grief and how grief is related to grace. And I would say grief, and so to look at it in the same way as I began this podcast, where you look at a business. Whenever there's some kind of grievance, I would say more often than not, the grievance has been caused because of an incident that was devoid of grace. Something happened that was devoid of grace, and therefore, what do we call it? A grievance. Because grief is caused by an absence of grace. That's what causes grief, because the sensation of what has been lost hits you all at once. Because there's no grace. So let's say I'm the owner of a naturally aspirated Aston Martin DB9 V12, and the government tomorrow says we're banning all of these vehicles tomorrow. And let's say I just bought it today. I'm going to have a grievance. And you can imagine all of the owners of, vehicles that burn fossil fuels. Imagine the upheaval and the uproar. Everyone would have a grievance. Well, lots of people would. However, we've still decided that they are going to be banned. And so why is there no grief? Why am I not laying a grievance? It's because I've already been gradually mourning the loss. I've reconciled it internally. I've made peace with it, and now I've made a decision to move on, and so I accept it. So there's no grievance. It's the same in business. Grief is always caused when there's a lack of grace. And we had some incidents recently in our business where some certain decisions had to be made for to preserve certain things, and there wasn't a scenario where grace, we had the luxury of grace, let's put it that way. And that when that happens, the people on the receiving end of it, they experience that as ruthlessness. So when someone's taken from us, like straight away, a loved one, and it's a tragic accident, it feels ruthless. It feels like the universe is against us, like it's trying to hurt us. It feels so ruthless. And what I would say is that in business, when you think of ruthlessness, we always think about business, a ruthless business person. And you go on YouTube and you've got videos by famous billionaires and why it's essential to be ruthless in business. And what I would say is that it is I would disagree in saying that it's essential. What I would say is that it's unavoidable at times, and that if there's ever a scenario where the decision to introduce grace would create a further detrimental impact upon another aspect of the organisation, then self-preservation has to kick in at some point. And this is where the ruthlessness of nature comes in. Whenever we experience something that is ruthless, it is always for an act of self-preservation. Now, that's not always to say that the person we perceive as being ruthless would be at risk, or the business would be at risk if they did introduce grace. But what it does mean is that person holds a significant amount of fear. So when we're afraid, we feel like we're under threat. And so that's when people knee-jerk react. That's when people make decisions that are devoid of grace. And that's why it happens. So in terms of death, because, talking about grievances in a business, they happen when there's no grace, when a knee-jerk decision's made suddenly. So what about when a loved one is taken from us suddenly? What would we actually want? Is we would want a grace period. We'd want to know that they're on the way out, and so that we can have a grace period, come to terms with the fact that they are on the way out, that they may be in the process of dying, and we can invest ourselves into that relationship to preserve that time that we have with them. And a huge piece of grief, to say, let's say someone we love drops dead of a heart attack, we have a grievance because we mourn for the lost potential of what could have been if there were grace. So grief is always about the lost potential to experience something. If the government tells me that I can't drive my my car that uses fossil fuels, they tell me I can't use it tomorrow, I raise a grievance because I'm having to mourn the lost potential of everything I could have done if I was still able to drive my car, all the road trips I could have had, all the journeys I could have had, all the donuts I could have done in the car park. So grief is always about lost opportunity, lost potential. This is why when we lose someone that we love, we always think, if only I told them I loved them, if only we could have gone on that one last holiday, if only we could have spent more time together, if only I hadn't ignored them when da-da-da-da-da. And so what grace does is it gives us an opportunity to create a bucket list, to say that, to put us into a situation, in a scenario where when someone dies, we feel in our heart that together we lived, together we made the most of every opportunity we had to enjoy each other and to experience each other and to share with one another, to create with one another. So grace is one of the most beautiful and powerful aspects of nature, I believe, that there is. The power of grace. I would say the most I would say that if you can live a life filled with grace, you will have lived a life that you absolutely loved. Because you don't have any trauma. You experienced the grace that enabled you to be able to immerse yourself in every moment. Your mind didn't have to dissociate you from any aspect of your experience. And so you were present for all of it. And so a life that's filled with grace is a life that is devoid of trauma. And so if anyone, if I was to be able to make a wish, it would be, I wish that for every moment that every human being has ever experienced that's resulted in trauma or dissociation, my wish would be that all of those experiences could have been replaced with grace, or could have had grace infused or incorporated into them. The world would be a very, very different place if it was filled with grace. And so the last thing I want to leave with you is that if you have people that you care about, that you love, it's important for you to understand that they're not going to be here forever. It's important for you to understand that there is an ending that's already in the process of materializing. And so from the moment we're all born, we've got a period of grace to make the most of every moment of every day, to realize the potential of every day, how we want to invest ourselves into that day, into the people around us. Are we realizing the full potential of the time that we could be spending? So you already have grace, is the truth, and it's your life. And so if there are people you care about right now, especially if they're, you may have elderly grandparents or even parents who are, but not elderly necessarily, but, that they're approaching retirement or they are retired. It's time to create that grace period consciously now. Otherwise, when it happens and when you do lose them, it'll be like your whole world is imploded. It'll be like the entire world stopped. And all you will be filled with is instant regret for the lost opportunity of what you could have experienced while they were here. And so my greatest recommendation to you, and I don't like to give advice, I prefer to just share my own perspective, but everyone that you love dearly, what is the unrealized potential that you would grieve if you lost them today? What would you have done if they were gone? And start creating your graceful exit. And that's not in a morbid way. It's in a mature way, that where you realize that there is an ending. And so when that ending comes, it's truly a celebration of how you lived. Truly. They're not just words spoken in the funeral. It's truly a celebration of how you lived. And you can relive those moments rather than mourn the lost potential of what could have been. This is what grief is. And the other thing I would add is the last, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm someone who's aberrant. I'm someone who is, who has ideas and concepts that no one else can relate to. And it's very, very difficult for me to communicate my ideas with people in a way that that means something to them and that they can understand. And so it would be the easiest thing in the world for me to just go, oh, this is too hard. This is too hard. I should just give up and, just do something else. That's one of the hardest things about innovating, is that when you're sharing concepts that no one's heard before, and in my case, even when you market validate them, people don't understand straight away. They don't get it. And even when they do get it, they become skeptical. They think it's a theory. That's the one I got recently. These all sound like theories. And yet the presentation I presented were of projects that had been market validated by the theory. But something about it doesn't sink in with people. And so it'll be very easy for me to just go, listen, this is too hard. But I want a life that I can look back on and say that was well lived. That I decided to live on my own terms. And that, other people's reactions and that there was no experience that I had during the process of my life that deterred me from realizing what I saw as my own highest potential, for the impact that I wanted to make, for the legacy that I want to leave behind. That's mine, and that's a very personal thing, and it's got nothing to do with anyone else. And I think a lot of people that I know, especially entrepreneurs, when they set out to do something, they think it's about doing things for others. They think it's about some selfless kind of thing, where it's because you're helping so many people that's what makes it successful. But in truth, it's a selfish thing, because my vision is my own, and I'm not trying to live my life the way that I'm going about it to please anyone or to help anyone. I'm doing it for the sense of satisfaction that I'll feel, and having realized what I believe is my own potential. And we can't live any other way. Unless you want to live a life that you look back on and regret, you have to stay the course. You have to stay the course. And all I want to share with you right now is that if you are at the bleeding edge of something, and I can promise you, and even though you'll doubt this as I say it, you won't want to hear it. You'll think that it just applies to everyone except for you, but I'm telling you it doesn't. Every human being has something unique that they are at the bleeding edge of, that is uniquely different to every other human being. There's a uniqueness to every human being because the DNA of every form of life holds its destiny. And your DNA is unique. You don't look like anyone else. You don't behave like anyone else. You don't speak like anyone else, act like anyone else. That's because the lens of your perspective is completely unique. Your DNA is utterly unique. And your destiny is contained within that DNA. Like an oak tree, its DNA it is going to become an oak tree. There's no other potential that an acorn can become other than a magnificent oak tree. And that destiny is in its DNA. And it's the same with you. You have DNA within you that holds a destiny for the potential of what you can become. And if you resist that destiny, you'll suffer the whole way. You've got to surrender to the uniqueness of what's within you. And unless you can, there will be no grace. You'll feel like you're getting dragged through the bushes backwards towards realizing that potential. When in truth, all of your suffering was caused by your own refusal to surrender to it. And, this isn't to say that it's easy, because it's not. It's the hardest thing in the world to do, is to knowingly come out and be different to everyone, because you are different, and to claim it and to appreciate it, and to put yourself out there in ways that where you're going to be judged, and keep moving forward regardless of what happens. You don't want to mourn the loss of the potential you had with your own life when you get older. I promise you. You're not going to care if you're rich, when you're on death's door. You're not going to care how much your asset portfolio is worth when you're on death's door. That asset portfolio and that wealth is your means of expressing your nature into the environment to influence it and leave your legacy. Holding on to wealth is pointless. It's meaningless. What's the purpose of wealth? It's to be shared. The purpose of wealth is to be shared. The reason wealth exists is so that there is a surplus that can spawn new forms of life, new creations that don't have their own energy, that don't have the ability to generate wealth yet. They rely and they depend on the surplus wealth of others in order to become something new. Every form of life, every cell that splits through mitosis, the cell is giving a surplus of energy so that new cell can become what it is. And lots of people say that when a cell splits in half, it's sacrificing itself. But in truth, it's investing itself. It has a surplus, and it invests that surplus into creating a new form of life that inherits its DNA, but adapts and evolves in its own unique way to the unique environment that it's contained within. So even though those two cells start off identical, they become entirely unique. And so what are you investing yourself into? So my hope is that in listening to this, and somehow you're able to introduce a state of grace into your life and as many aspects of your life as possible, that you can look at phases of your life and aspects of your life where you're trying to hold on or cling on to something that you're not ready to let go of because of grief. And I would invite you to imagine what a grace period would look like. What is this thing that I'm not prepared to let go of? Like, there's no way I'll let go of this right now. What is a scenario within which I would be prepared to let go of this if there was a period of grace? How long is that grace period? What does that transition look like? What is the newer and better thing? For me to let go of this thing, What is the newer and better thing that I can transition into, where I won't feel as though I've lost anything? Like with the Aston Martin DB9, I've accepted that I'm willing to let go of the engine. And so I have a grace period. And so my grace period is a project to transition that engine out of that vehicle and into an electric engine. So now all of a sudden I have a consciously created grace period where that enables me to let go of what I previously would have resisted. And it applies to every form of life, even your loved ones, so that when it is time for them to go, you actually do let them go. And they can transition. And once they're gone, you won't try to hold on forever and basically ruin your life, wishing that you had invested yourself into them, wishing that you had had more grace, more of a grace period with them. You can create that grace period now, and I'd highly suggest that you do that. Okay, so that's it for now for the nature of grace. Cheers for now.